Welcome back to the newsroom. It's time now for Focus today. Over the next few minutes, we'll be looking at how the crisis in Egypt appears to have put the United States in a diplomatic bind. The Obama administration doesn't want to block democracy at work, and it doesn't want to be trapped on the wrong side of history. But it doesn't want to alienate President Hosni Mubarak either, should he remain in power. Next to Israel, Egypt is America's #1 ally in the Middle East, and every year the United States provides Egypt with more than $1 billion worth of military aid.
First, Washington pleaded for reform in Egypt, with President Mubarak still on board.
Good morning. We continue to raise with the Egyptian government, as we do with other governments in the region, the imperative for reform to provide a better future for all.
Washington was cautious. Mubarak has been one of its strongest allies in the Middle East for decades. He has safeguarded peace with Israel for 30 years, has mediated between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and guaranteed some stability around the volatile Gaza border. The White House fears that if Mubarak is ousted, all this would collapse, that the anti-U.S. Muslim Brotherhood would take over. But after the Egyptian president failed to end street protests through both threats and promises of reform, the U.S. changed its tone.
Well, we have been very clear that we want to see a transition to democracy, and we want to see the kind of steps taken that will bring that about.
A transition to democracy with or without Hosni Mubarak. So far, U.S. officials have stopped short of calling Mubarak to leave. But one U.S. senator has said, like protesters in Cairo, that Mubarak has to leave. Meanwhile, Muslim Brotherhood officials say it's already too late.
America currently supports the regime and abandons the Egyptian people. They have proved that many times in the past. They support the regime to the detriment of the people. They've damaged their own interests.
The U.S. has sent an emissary to monitor the transition in Cairo. Both Washington and its allies are concerned about what could follow the Mubarak regime, and if they will manage to keep cordial relations with that successor.
And for more now on how the Egyptian uprising could play out for the United States, we're joined by Salman Sheikh. He's from the think tank Brookings Institution and he's the director of its center in Doha. Thanks very much, sir, for speaking to us today here at France 24. First of all, there's been criticism that the United States failed to foresee what was going to happen in Egypt before the protests started. Do you agree with the assessment that perhaps the United States was caught on the back foot?
I would agree that it was caught on the back foot, but I wouldn't pin the blame just on them. I think a couple of weeks ago, certainly even before the Tunisian uprising, nobody thought that Egypt would be going in this direction. And even after the Tunisian uprising started, there were, of course, questions being asked, is Egypt next? And the answer was, by and large, a calculated no. So, yes, it has been a diplomatic, foreign policy and intelligence failure on the part of the Americans, as it has been of others in the region, notably Israel. But we shouldn't blame them too much for that.
But how do you assess the American response so far, though? Have they made the best out of a, for them, bad situation?
I think they would say that. I think independent assessment would say is that they've been perennially playing catch-up. In American language terms, they've been behind the curve. We do have to acknowledge that they've traveled very far in the last week. Just 1 week ago, Secretary Clinton was talking about stability and the regime being stable, and now we are having language from Mr. President Obama as well as the White House spokesman and Secretary Clinton talking about an orderly transition. So they've traveled very far, but I believe they're still not traveled far enough.
Stand by for us, Mr. Sheikh, because we've got a soundbite from Robert Gibbs, the White House press secretary, and I just want you to listen to that, and then we'll come back straight to you.
You know, but this is not about appointments. This is about actions. That's what I think people here and people around the world need to see from the Egyptian government.
Okay, that was Robert Gibbs speaking about what's next here, really, for Egypt. What do you think is the best outcome for the United States at this point? A lot of people have said that perhaps behind closed doors, American diplomats would prefer Hosni Mubarak to remain in office, at least for now. Is that your reading as well?
I think the American administration would like an orderly transition, as they've said, and if that involves President Mubarak, that would be, I think, their preferred option, an option whereby which President Mubarak and the regime slowly give up power over the next few months, leading to the September elections, which then herald in a new era of democratic transition. I think perhaps that's a little bit wishful thinking at this stage of the game, but I think that's what they're hoping for.
Now, some very interesting articles that I've been reading, they basically state that there is a risk that perhaps the United States could lose Egypt, much as they lost Iran during the Islamic Revolution back in the last years of the 1970s. Do you think there is that risk from America's perspective that they could lose Egypt in the same way as they lost Iran?
I think there are different cases. What I will say is, of course, the United States has over decades now tied very vital and critical interests to Egypt. And those are, yes, in peril at this point in time. But to compare it with the Iranian Revolution, I think, is perhaps a diversion. The Iranian Revolution was led by a particular figurehead in Ayatollah Khamenei. It had a distinct Islamist revolutionary tone to it, which the Egyptian Revolution does not. The Egyptian Revolution, as I've called it, is a part of an Arab people's revolution. And what nature and shape it takes, we'll have to see. And we'll have to see as part of the democratic transition that takes place in that country, we hope. What I can say is that it's being led by predominantly young people who are fed up with their particular lack of opportunities. It is by people who are much more urban. 50% of the Arab populations are now in cities, and that is the case in Egypt more than that. And also in terms of the economic factors that they are looking for. So this particular revolution is a revolution for justice and for dignity, very different from, I believe, the Iranian Revolution.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I just wanted to ask you about the Muslim Brotherhood, because there is, of course, that perhaps the Muslim Brotherhood, the main opposition group in Egypt, could move into a power vacuum if Hosni Mubarak were to step down. And the Brotherhood, of course, they've been talking quite tough on the United States. What do you say about that?
I think the Brotherhood will have a major role to play in Egyptian politics going forward. Though it itself is an organization which will need to improve its own organization and to be the force that perhaps they want to be. I will note that the statements that we've heard in the last few days coming out from the Brotherhood talk about them as being part of a national unity government. I'm not sure whether they actually do want to take on the burdens of government solely, especially in the first few years of the transition.
All right, Salman Sheikh from the Brookings Institution, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us today. And with that, we're going to wrap up Focus today, this Tuesday. You're watching France 24. Stay with us.